Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Louisa the Jesus, and I'm here today to talk about effective recruitment strategies for 2020. Although we have COVID among us and some businesses are slowing down and struggling in terms of meeting business objectives, we have others that are thriving and need additional support and resources to complement their team in meeting those business objectives. And it's such a variable workforce right now that has to be adopted by many, given all the different accommodations with COVID, um, to ensure that we can still reach the business objectives that we've set out to achieve for this year and next. So, I wanted to take the time today to walk you through a number of pieces so that you can be set up for success and making sure you hire the right fit and the process on how to evaluate that. We will go through welcome and introductions. I can share a little bit about myself and my team. We'll continue on to current market trends and considerations, share some case studies, and really get in depth in terms of the recruitment process. So walk you through each step of the process that is going to ensure you hire the right person, that you're thorough in your evaluation process. Before we get into final thoughts and Q&A. So as I mentioned, my name is Louisa the Jesus. I'm the founder and president of LD Human Resources. We've been servicing small to medium-sized businesses with all their HR needs, both strategic and hands-on, whether it be recruitment or performance management, compensation, succession planning, employee relations, legislative requirements, policies, employment offers, terminations, really all aspects. A lot of accommodations right now is what we're working on, as well as recruiting. I've been in HR for over 20 years. I've had the opportunity to work along some incredible leaders and colleagues that has really helped me establishing some wonderful HR best practices that we can apply to many of our clients in all the areas of HR. Alongside me, I have an incredible team. Julie, right here, Julie has been in HR for quite some time as well, just over 15 years. She's certified and has come from a professional services background, but since joining us just short of a year ago, she has been working in all the different industries, call it manufacturing, construction, professional services, um, retail, hospitality. We've really had the opportunity to work in many different industries. Christina Foggia is our amazing administrator and helped everything come together today. So thank you, Christina. And she is also continuing her education and a wonderful resource to help us in the background and on the front line. And then we have Christina Gallos as well, who has been with me almost 2 years, incredible consultant as well, supporting our clients and many businesses. She did come in from the professional services, financial services area prior to joining, but again, has worked in many different industries, as we all do on the team. Really am not able to say that we can achieve greatness without the collaborative efforts of our team. Collectively, we really provide a lot of opportunities in best practices and solutions for our clients. So, talking about recruitment, what are some of the current trends, considerations that we're seeing? Well, definitely, there is an increase in remote positions as we consider how we're hiring people, because we are still in the reality of a work from home environment. Organizations are finding efficiencies and opportunities to have work from home, where others really on the front line need to be in the workplace or at the place of work, depending on the type of industry. It has been a little bit of a shift. There was an employees market out there prior to COVID where we did see that we were paying hiring bonuses and really couldn't find the right staff because there were more jobs than there were people. Now we're finding that there is a little bit more uh, opportunities out there for employers to find the right fit and shop around for that right person. As with, unfortunately, with some layoffs and slowdowns of other organizations, there are definitely many other people in the workforce looking for work with our higher unemployment rate. There are still those individuals that are not ready to return to work. So we are still a little bit limited. Also have to recognize that we have to make accommodations for childcare, elder care, or just pure health and safety concerns. There's definitely more of a variable workforce, not understanding or being sure of the certainty of what the future economy will hold for businesses. We're seeing more short-term and contract opportunities versus permanent, depending on the industry that we're in. And of course, we have to ensure that we are being fair and equitable in everything that we do when we hire people and when we employ our team members. And so important, even more important now, to ensure that you're having that solid recruitment process in place. So before we get into the actual recruitment process, I thought I would give you a couple examples, personal examples actually, that I had. So when I was starting off in my career, I was offered an opportunity to interview as an HR manager. It was an IT company that needed support. It was it was advertised as a contract, a temporary role, which is very common in a female-dominated industry. So I thought, let me see if I can go for this position. I applied. I had received an email which verified my interest that I had still had in it. Had a phone call, and the phone call was simply just to set up an interview, telling me where I would go and what time to be there and who to ask for. So I did my research and my homework. I looked up the company online, got to know their business from what I could see, and prepared myself as per the job posting of how I could have some examples of times that I had those skill sets, that I demonstrated those skill sets. So I was, really eager for this opportunity. It was close to home, and I was very excited to go for this interview. Arrived early, 15 minutes. When I walked in, the receptionist was on the phone. She kind of ignored me, dismissed me, told me to take a seat after she asked who I was there for, and said he'll be with me in just a moment. That moment was about 20 minutes as I was sweating and anxious, waiting to meet the individual who was the general manager of the company at the time. When I went into the office and was called finally into the interview, I brought a copy of my resume with me and had sat down, and the manager said to me, "I'm sorry, what's your name again?" I said, "Oh, did you want a copy of my resume?" He says, "Sure, thank you. I don't have it with me." So demonstrated he wasn't prepared. I was a little bit weary. And as he went through, he took a few minutes in silence, looked at my resume, and then started to tell me basically what the job was, what he needed, share with me a little bit more about the company. I had an opportunity to speak a little bit, so I responded to that saying, yes, absolutely, asking a little bit more about the company, how many people, what different departments and areas, basically verifying some of the information I had read online. And then he started to ask me if I had any questions. So I had said, yes, please explain to me. I didn't say explain. I basically asked, can you tell me why this position is available? Well, then he got into the current manager being on a sick leave, and he didn't believe her. And, we have to work towards ending her employment. That would be my first task. So needless to say, he offered me the job before I left. I was very skeptical and was not sure if that was the place that I wanted to work. So that was, I would say, an example of recruitment not so great in terms of a candidate experience. Another example I'll show you or share with you is a recruitment experience that was very positive. I went to an interview that I had applied for. The individual called me prior to the interview, reviewed all my experience and background with me on the phone. Asked me about my salary expectations, my education, a little bit more about my interests and hobbies and things that I had on my resume. And from that point, had invited me in for an interview. When I arrived for the interview, I was greeted by a receptionist that was very pleasant, offered me a glass of water, started to make small talk with me to calm my nerves. And shortly after, I was called into the interview, and they welcomed me with smiles, offered again another glass of water, which was very kind, and then started to walk me through the process of what to expect in the interview, reviewing my resume, introduced me to everybody in the room, and then we went into the interview questions, which were, specifically tied to the role and what I would do, asking me of examples of experience when I have had that, and even if I didn't have examples, because perhaps that wasn't something that I had experience with, basically said, well, what would you do in that case? Um, which allowed me to express my thought process, even though I didn't feel that I met the mark because I didn't have that experience. Shortly after the interview, they, gave me a little tour of the department, and told me about next steps and when to hear back from them before we left. And stuck on time, I would say, as well, in terms of how long they told me the interview would be. Very positive experience overall. And I did take that opportunity and learned alongside amazing colleagues at that job, and stayed there for quite some time. So just two different experiences from a candidate perspective, which we'll talk about in the recruitment process. So let's get into the process itself. You say it's the 2020 process. However, this is probably the recruitment process that we should be considering overall and moving forward. Technically, we start off with, okay, what is the need? We recognize that we're falling short in an area and we need some extra help. So in that, we do a needs analysis. So I'm going to do an overview and then we'll get really deep dive into each of the pieces. From the needs analysis, we're going to develop a job posting, market the position so that we start to attract some candidates. Once we've identified the candidates, and we're going to do some pre-screening, looking at narrowing down however many resumes come in to our top candidates we want to call and review with them before we invite them into the interview phase. There's a little bit in between pre-screen and interview phase that we'll talk about, which is preparing for that interview phase. Once we've gone through that interview phase and any perhaps assessments that we think we need to further qualify to ensure that we can ensure that we've made the right decision, we're going to calibrate our results and make our final decision on who we want to move forward with. Then we get into a conditional offer, doing any kind of verifications from experience or education, so the background checks, before we finalize the offer and hopefully have the person accept to join us before we get into onboarding them. So this is a very high level overview. Now we'll get into each of the steps. So with the needs analysis, step one, what we're going to do is essentially, I'm going to walk you through as an HR consultant, and perhaps this is something that you can adopt without a consultant on your own, is really identifying with the hiring manager, okay, well, what is it that we need for this position? Who is it that they're going to report to? kind of personality does that person have? What is their management style? Who would they be best suited with? Is there anyone reporting to them? What kind of team do they have supporting them? In general, what besides, what is it that the job is? Because that is something obviously that we need to understand is details of the responsibilities and expectations. What kind of educational background would they need? What are the hours of work? Where is this position located? Do they have to travel? Is there any kind of uh, other sort of special considerations that we should be looking at before we get into, okay, what is the budget or the salary or total compensation or total rewards package, that whether there's a commission or a bonus, sort of what is it a little bit more about what this role entails. So these are the all the pieces that we're looking at as a needs analysis, so that we really understand, okay, what is the best fit here, and what are the nice to haves versus what is the absolute must have for this position. Because ideally we want to find the perfect candidate, and usually we don't find the perfect candidate, but we can train on certain things where we can't train on others. So this is a nice to have versus the need to. So that's our first step. Let's figure out what is this role before we get into the second, where we're essentially selling the job. So we're going to put together a job posting. The job posting is not a job description. So it's not, we're not discussing or outlining the tasks and the details and all the little innuendos of the job. We're really at a high level providing a summary, outlining the major responsibilities, providing some company information, perhaps some more details about success factors for the role, how they can apply, making sure that we're identifying that we're accommodating for legislative purposes and also any kind of necessary accommodations that may be required for those persons with disabilities that might be interested in the role, and demonstrating that we're that equal opportunity employer. So really, we're selling the company, and we're also calling for what are the call to action that we need for someone who could be qualified for this job to get those applications in. Once we'd identify with respect to the posting and how we're going to market or sell the role, we're going to then talk about, well, how is it that we best target that? Do we look at, is it a junior role? Should we partner with some universities? What job boards should we maximize and post it on? Is it better suited on a position that's on LinkedIn? Can we put it on Indeed? Should we be looking at perhaps posting this through Instagram or Facebook? Or a lot of people post things on Kijiji. What professional associations, where is it that we can attract the right candidates? Maybe we need to look at some temp agencies for this type of role, or other recruitment firms or headhunters that can expand our search and outreach that network to get the most candidates in for us to evaluate at the time. And really, what is that response time? I mean, maximum, we're looking at the top candidates typically apply within the first 3 to 5 days. So we really need to have the time before you post to respond to those resumes and those applications, because you really do run the risk of losing out on getting the top candidates because you haven't responded quick enough. Because people are applying to your job, they're applying to others, and if they're good, they're going to be scooped up pretty quickly. So we want to really make sure that we've got the response time, have the time to review it, and also, identify those quickly who we want to move into the pre-screen stage. So pre-screening, we've at this point narrowed down which resumes, whether it's education or previous experience or overall fit, that we see something on the resume, and we're going to start calling those people. Before we do, it's important that we ensure that we do a pre-screen questionnaire, so that we're identifying those key pieces that we have reviewed in the needs analysis for that position. So here we're assessing the fit. We want to make sure that we've selected that candidate before we get into step 4, which is the interview phase. But on the phone, you don't want to waste people's times to bring them into an interview if perhaps they don't have a good command of the English language, or a certain skill set or budget, if that's something that's really required for the role. Um, Similarly, if they say that they can't meet the hours, or perhaps it's a night shift, or they need it on weekends, and they're not available for that, well, why bother bringing them in if you know in advance that it's really not a fit? We've kind of screened out those individuals. Um, so, you also want to ensure that you've, like I said, gone through a discussion about compensation, understand, so that you can identify whether that fits in your budget or not. So, a lot of those pieces are very important to consider before we bring them in for the interview phase. So, in the interview phase, we want to take a look at we've identified, the candidates. We're going to invite them in, tell them approximate time, either when or where they have to be, whether it's in person or online. I would highly recommend with COVID that we do our social responsibility and screen online first. So set up a Zoom, WhatsApp, or uh, Microsoft Teams, whatever forum that you use. It's a secure internet connection, to have that confidential conversation. So important that we're going through and preparing in advance that interview questionnaire. So we need to have questions that are going to evaluate the skills that we need for the role, the soft skills as well, such as behavioral type questions, so leadership skills, organizational skills, etc. And we may set up questions that are situational, so that we're asking those questions that will give us the understanding of whether they fit the organization and that needs analysis that you had first identified. You may consider other assessments such as, if it's a role that they really have to have the knowledge and skill to create macros or use Excel or Word, you can create and work on some assessments on the computer to evaluate that. You may, if they're leading other people, you may want to do a personality profile so you have a better understanding of their work habits and communication styles and such. So really important to make sure that you've prepared for that interview. If you are going to bring them into the workplace, because it is a physical workplace that is open, or you do need them to come into the office with ensuring physical distancing, you've got your COVID protocol. That's a really important piece too, because it gives them that opportunity to see, okay, how long is it going to take me to get to work? Where is it located? So from a commute perspective, does that work for me? Depending on what it is that you're going to be doing. The behavioral type interview questions are truly ones that, predict future behavior by identifying past behavior. Situation, it's when those who are going to be specific of what they would do in a situation, as I mentioned in the example, if they didn't have that experience yet. And of course, those assessments. So, in the interview phase, so once they've got there, essentially, you are going to welcome that candidate. You're hosting them. So just as much as the interview is, or the interest or the interviewer is evaluating the candidate, the interviewee is also evaluating the organization and whether it's a fit for them. So, the objectives of the interview is really to confirm the information that you had in the application that you spoke about over the phone. Make sure that you've got that relevant detail that we need to ensure the fit. And as I mentioned, you want to manage that interview in a fair and equitable and professional manner, so that you're presenting that positive image of the company as they're just as much evaluating you. So we're going to open with greeting the candidate, hosting, introducing ourselves, describing what the process is. Perhaps you're going to tell them, hey, I may be taking notes, so please um, uh, don't be offended if I don't make as much eye contact. I'm going to be going through your resume to start. We're going to then get into the interview questions. Then I'll have the opportunity to ask questions, and then we'll talk about next steps and timelines. This way that the candidate knows what to expect. In that body of the interview, we're really reviewing the application. We're asking those specific questions that we just talked about, whether it's behavioral, situational, whether we're doing assessments, and then we're going to allow the opportunity for the candidate to ask questions as well. And then in closing, we're going to provide them with the next steps, timelines, thank them, and essentially review our notes to make sure that we're closing off accordingly. Some do's and don'ts. So make sure you have a plan. Make sure you've read the resume and review their application in advance. Ask relevant questions, not those that are inappropriate nor have no relevance to the role. And make sure that we're asking the same questions to all the applicants. So with that, from a legislative perspective, we do need to maintain records of our interviews because should someone feel that they didn't get an opportunity because they've been discriminated against, you could be liable if you don't have notes to prove otherwise. Okay? Because sometimes there are those biases. Let's be real in terms of what's going on right now with discrimination in today's world. It's so important to have that fair and equitable process so that we're demonstrating that we are socially responsible and that we're really evaluating on fit for the position, not preference for the wrong reasons. So do still make sure that you're listening more than speaking, okay? It's the time that we need to hear from the applicant. And do ensure that you're asking clarifying questions if you need to, and take notes, because I know myself, I won't remember even what I had for dinner yesterday. And make sure that you're paying attention. So do not be distracted. Put your cell phones away. Don't be interrupted, with your phone or your computer, whatever it is. Do not engage in personal conversation. We can, of course, make the candidate feel comfortable, but with small talk about, the weather, that elevator pitch, if you will, but not into personal of, I had one of my colleagues, was asked once when she was planning to have her next kid. That is no one's business, and who says that she's planning to have another kid? It's completely inappropriate. So no personal conversation. Sometimes candidates do offer their own personal conversation. It's fine to acknowledge and appreciate it, but really not to continue it. And again, you don't want to ask any questions that, like as I said, can be perceived as discriminatory, and do not want to dominate that airtime. Like I said, you want to be listening and try not to react. Sometimes people say some pretty interesting stories in interviews. You're going to have that poker face on, even if you're thinking in your head, wow, I can't believe they just said that. So just, smile and nod and continue on with the questions until you finish that interview. So, and our next few steps are really, let's collaborate perhaps with anybody else that was in the interview, whether we're doing assessments or there's a personality profile that we're going to kind of take into consideration. Essentially, we're going to move forward with, once we've selected that candidate, we're going to then ask for them to provide us with references and whatever other credit or criminal checks that might be relevant for the role before we present them with that conditional offer of employment based on those pieces. One of the things with references, a lot of companies don't provide references. So reference letters could be a tool of consideration, past performance reviews, but I find that it's so important to conduct those reference checks yourself or have targeted questions. So, you might find that there's a gap in the interview where you're like, I just wasn't sold on one thing. I wonder if, they really have this ability to do this piece, or that something just, you weren't confirmed or certain on. Ask them in the reference, did you ever have an experience of that candidate where they were able to lead a project, and tell me about that. It's always good to have that insight of a past employer of who they have worked for that can share with you what it is that you're really looking for and you need for the role. Um, and typically we look for those who the individuals directly reported to or that has reported to them, versus, colleagues, depending on the type of role that it is. So on the almost the final stage here, I should say, it is the final stage, is really before you get into that final offer. Usually when you're asking for references and discussing next steps, it's always a good idea to confirm what their salary expectations are, what their availability is, if they have any upcoming vacation planned, so that you can effectively prepare and collaborate with the other leaders in your organization to put together a final offer. And essentially, I always say to verbally communicate that offer so that you can iron out a little bit of the details before you put it in writing, so that it's a warm shoe-in for them to sign back and accept. And then you're looking at finalizing that start date before we commence the onboarding process is really, which you can find our other webinar on our YouTube channel that walks you through the process of onboarding, where it's really pre-start. So before the candidate starts, right, how do we prepare for them and set them up for success, get their computer ready, have a buddy set up, and especially in COVID, have those checkpoints set up. So that's onboarding, pre-start, first day, first week, first month, first 3 months, first 6 months before the end of their first year. And that's really it when it comes to the recruitment process, where we are able to walk you through all those pieces and identify the right fit. Typically, that process will take between 4 and 6 weeks. By the time you post, get the candidates in, have that process move forward for the offer, and perhaps there's a waiting period before they start because they had to provide notice to their previous employer before they actually start in their new job at your workplace. But it really is driven by the candidates. They really drive the process, because if there is not enough candidates or the right candidates, then of course you may be commencing at or rewinding one stage to the other to reset that process. That's a wrap, everyone. So just thought I would put it out to you. If there are any questions at all, please feel free to let me know. I am just going to check in the chat box if I had any come in throughout, if you want to bear with me. Okay, here's a good question. And so the question is, can you ask an employee if they have any children, or if they have any responsibilities in their home environment that will prevent them from coming to the office? So it's a very good question, because with COVID right now, we may need to have those who do not have limitations or restrictions, given what your current workforce may have accommodations with. And so I would say that you can ask, but it's very delicate in the way that you ask, because you have to think about what the fundamental needs and the requirements of the role are. So when you're asking about those questions, it's really to frame it that way. So just wanted to confirm that you have availability and flexibility to come to the office every day, or 3 out of the 5 days, and is there any preference or restrictions for you on your start and end times? So you're not asking them, do you have kids at home that you're homeschooling? You're asking them about specifically with this role, if there's any limitations, so that you can note it down, because it is essentially a requirement that you need. So there definitely are opportunities that we need to navigate through carefully so that we're not breaking any laws, offending anyone, and being discriminatory in our practice. Great question. Thank you so much. Let me see if there's any other questions. I'll leave it to you. All right. Well, I think that's about it for today. If there are any other questions or you need some support with any of your HR needs or recruitment support in general as well, please feel free to reach out to me, and we look forward to hearing from you and wish you luck as you commence your recruitment process, and welcome you to revisit this if you need to kind of have another overview as you go through it on our YouTube channel at LD Human Resources. Thank you so much for joining me today, and have a wonderful afternoon.